Gaskets, John Beliefs and Howard. Tonight, we're going to be working on the basement bird again. This time, we're going to be trying to fix the oil leak. We did the transmission leak in the last episode. Now we're going to try to tackle this engine leak. And I think I have a sneaking suspicion I know where it's coming from. I thought it was the rear main seal, and it still could be, but I think we're getting most of it under control by changing just the valve cover gaskets, and I'll show you why. Let me turn this camera.
The block was wet when I had it up in the air, which you can see that in the other video. I'll come down here. Let me grab the... You see how everything's kind of damp down there. Look at it. Probably can get in there. Let's see if we can get in there this way a little better. Well, yeah, you can see it a little bit. But anyway, it's wet there. But I pulled the air cleaner off to get to the valve cover. And look how much oil is just sitting there. See right back in there? Right here. It's all pulled up and over in here. The rest of the intake's dry. So it's either gonna be the intake gasket or the valve cover gasket. So I'm hoping we get easy with just the valve cover gasket. So we're gonna take these off. I'm gonna dry as a bone over on this side, at least on the top side. And get those valve covers cleaned up, and when they're off, we're gonna clean them up and repaint them. I got some new gold paint to paint them, and we're gonna swap those gaskets. I'm hoping that's what it is. I don't know where else that oil would end up coming from, because this is all just solid here. There's not a way for it to leak in there, so I think what it could be doing is coming in from this gasket here. These are old quart gaskets, and they're probably just seeping out of there, filling this up and spilling into there. Yeah, it's just kind of, it's damp. So we'll get to it and see what we find. The valve cover off. It's not as clean in here as I was hoping, so probably the motor is probably not rebuilt. It's the clock's showing about 55,000, 54,000 original miles. Where these are prone to leak is right here, because this part of the valve cover seal is part of the intake manifold. The intake runs down here, and you can see there's a seam. There's where the gasket is there. But they tend to leak in these corners here. The gasket's actually sticking up there, so it's probably a spot where it would leak. And then back here, it's actually very wet, and you can see it on the gasket right there, all soaking wet. You can see where it was dripping off here. So that's a good sign. So the other spot looks a little wet up in here. The rest of it seems like it was sealing pretty decent. So this old quart gasket is gonna get replaced with a new quart gasket. We'll take that off and clean those up and get these looking all good, the sludge off in there. But for an original engine, that doesn't look too bad inside. There's some scuzz, more grease kind of type sludge in there, but we'll do what we can to clean that up there. We'll clean up our edge, make sure we don't have any gaskets stuck anywhere. Put a good layer of sealant on here to be sure that new valve cover gasket seals good. And I think we're gonna at least slow down, if not stop, most of our oil leak. You can see back there is pretty wet. I think we're gonna get this one licked. And if it's not the valve cover gaskets, I'm pretty confident it would be an intake leak at that point, because this is, I don't know where that oil's coming from. If you guys are savvy to the 390s, this is my first time dealing with one, but if you guys are savvy with a 390 and you know where that oil leak would be coming from on that intake like that, let me know and leave a comment below. All right, time to get cleaning. All right, so rather than let that sit through the time lapse of me scraping everything off of here, this old gaskets are pretty dried out. That was stuck on pretty good. So what I ended up doing is I brought it over to another tray where I could spill some liquid on it. I sprayed it with some carb cleaner, and I also used some lacquer thinner and just kept moistening the gasket, and it freed it up enough where I could just use a razor and scrape that clean. So I gotta degrease this down pretty good, and I'll put it in the bead blast cabinet. You can see the
It's definitely going to need a repaint. The paint wore off pretty good just from getting the lacquer thinner and stuff on it. So there's one valve cover. So let's go do that with the next valve cover. All right, this one's kind of the same deal. Real wet back here. You can see where it was dripping off. So we were getting a lot of leak all along that edge there. That's a good sign that we're onto the right repair. You can see where the gasket seam hits, where the cylinder head and the intake manifold meet. So that's a common leak spot there, but mine actually looks dry there. It looks like it's just there. On this side, same thing as the other side. You know, a little scuzzy, but not bad for an original mile motor. I'm pretty happy with this engine. It runs really well. You can see this side already kind of clean up the valve train a little better, clean the top of the springs off and stuff. All right, so we're gonna get these cleaned up. Rather than bore you with those details, I'll get this all cleaned up and then we'll get them bead blasted and painted so we can put them back on the car tomorrow. We're all bead blasted up down to bare metal, so these valve covers are nice and clean now. There's no major pitting at all. There's no dents, so these are in really good shape. So now I just got to wipe them down. I'll put them in some acid-etch primer, and we'll be able to give them a square to gold. Cleaned up the edges where the gasket material was and everything, so these things are going to look like brand new when we get them on the car. I'm going to wipe these down a little bit of lacquer thinner to get any kind of oils or anything off it before we paint them, and that way the paint will stick better and it'll come out smoother with less of a chance of any kind of bubbling or wrinkles or any kind of weirdness. And I'm usually pretty good at getting them to wrinkle when I don't want them to. And the primer dries quick too, which is good because I got a lot of stuff I got to get done today. It does not involve the T-Bird. This is Duplicolor acid-etch primer that we're using today. That stuff seems to coat pretty good. All right, let's make them gold. For a high-end car, the underside of the hood of this is pretty subtle. So back in 63, yeah, gold valve covers, gold air cleaner, and everything else is black for the most part. And kind of makes it look like a lump. So I keep thinking about pulling the whole thing out and cleaning it up and detailing things out. Maybe pick a color for the block or something, but we'll see. Right now it runs good, and we just want it to stop leaking. As the valve covers are painted, they came out really good. They're still wet, so they'll probably tone down quite a bit once they completely dry. Says they'll be completely dry in 3 hours. Now, that looks pretty scuzzy. See, one thing always leads to the next. So I have enough paint. I think I can give this a good coat, so I might end up cleaning that up and painting that before I put it back in the car. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way the valve covers turned out. They look good. So now we got everything painted and dried. I'm gonna take a little bit of silicone, just a skim coat, just to hold the gasket in place when I stick it down, make it easier to put in because it gets a little tight under the hood there. As big as that car is, there's not a lot of space between the wheel wells, and it makes it kind of difficult to get in. So I'm using this orangey color stuff, not because it's warranting high temperature, but it's because it's what I have in stock. So we're using Felpro gasket number VS13049R. They're the rubber ones. I really wanted cork, but they only had the rubber ones in stock in town here, 2 different stores. So I put a slight bead of silicone around the edge of the valve cover to let this sit on here, so it'll help hold the gasket on when we go to set it down. And before I set it down, I'll put a little dab of silicone on the engine in the corners where I showed you where the intake and cylinder head meet. We want to put a little silicone in there, fill up any low spots to help reduce the chance of any kind of leakage. And that should take care of all that stuff. So still got to goop up this one and get that one done. All right, so we got this valve cover down, and this is the harder side because my AC compressor's in the way, so it's a little tighter back there. Plus you got the booster in the way, so it was easier to take the vacuum line off the booster to get a little bit more clearance in there. You don't want to tighten these valve covers down too much. There's a big spacing between the valve covers, between the valve cover bolts. That's a pretty big span. And if you crank these down too much, it ends up warping and pulls these down and curls this lip up and allows it to kind of leak. So you don't want to put them in real tight. You just want to kind of give them a little twist and snug them down decent, but not over squeeze them. Now we can get this side in. This will go a lot easier. No wires on this side to worry about. Just the only thing that's in the way, a little bit of heater hose clearance and the oil fill. And we can put those in there and start them just like we did on the other side, except I need my light. So we'll get this all started, and when this one's buttoned down, we'll hook our wires back up. And there we have it. It's all buttoned back up. I didn't have enough paint to redo the entire air cleaner, but I had enough to do the center part, and actually it doesn't look too bad that way. One of these days I'll get another can of paint and we'll strip down that whole air cleaner thing and repaint the whole deal. But we're all back together. I'm gonna let that sit a little bit before we try to start it. I just don't want to fire it up. I want to get the silicone time to set up before we start testing if it's leak free or not. Should be good, but it'll be as good as those gaskets are anyway. Okay, let's see. It's been a day since we did the valve cover gaskets, and I drove it to work yesterday and drove it back. That way anything that was on it would, in theory, drip off. So, a little drop there. Yeah, still got some. It's quite a bit still, actually, but I don't know if that's room main seal or still dripping off the block, so we might try, I don't know, it's probably room main seal. But I might clean the block with some degreaser, hose it down real good, and get all that stuff off there, and do the cardboard test again. Well, I gunked the motor down and drove it around some, and I'm still getting oil back there, but it's not coming from the valve covers. So we slowed down the leak. It looks like probably the intake manifold's leaking. Slowed it down enough where it's not super, super bad. I get a couple drops when I stop. So the valve cover gaskets did make a difference on the old Bulletbird. And looks like maybe, I don't know, one of these days, we'll pull the engine out, reseal the whole thing, and make it so it's a little less leaky. But anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys got some tips off of it, and we'll see you in the next go around.